From CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center.
The members of the Education Coalition look at charter schools and they're like, oh, you get it. You have it so easy. You don't have to do all this compliance. And the reality is that more and more we have regulatory creep where we have more and more of the same responsibilities as school districts.
Welcome to Boarding Pass, your ticket to effective charter school governance. I'm Kathleen O'Halloran Heller, and more than 20 years ago, I got a bright idea that I was going to start a charter school. My son was in preschool, and I wanted to create a free Montessori charter school as a public education option in my small rural community. I actually said the words, I mean, really, how hard can it be? And 2 decades later, I know exactly how hard it is to build and maintain a high-quality charter school in California. So I'm going to take you down the path that I went down, and I'm going to help you learn everything you need to know to excel as a board member in a thriving charter school. Today, I would like to welcome my colleague Laura Kerr to our show. Laura is CSDC's Legislative and Community Outreach Specialist, and she began her career as a public education advocate more than 20 years ago. She has worked tirelessly to elect student-centered candidates to public office. She's organized local leaders to pursue equitable access to local bonds and parcel taxes. And she came to work at CSDC a couple of years ago and now heads up all of our legislation, advocacy, and policy efforts on behalf of our member schools. Laura also serves as a charter school board member on a charter school board in her local community, and she has a darling new puppy named Reggie. Welcome to Boarding Pass, Laura.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you're here. So we're going to talk today about advocacy, which is something you and I have both done quite a bit of in the education world. And we're going to, I think, maybe try to have some pointers and suggestions for people who are like, I don't want to do that, right? This is not something I want to do. This is not something I'm good at. And why should I have to? So let's start maybe just talking about what is advocacy, specifically legislative, but also local and, school board, all that kind of stuff. What's advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, added heart advocacy is asking for what you want, right? And I think as school board members, we do that in a lot of different ways. It can be as simple as myth busting with other fellow board members or parents that we come across, or our own family members. We want people to understand what charter schools are, that we're public, tuition free, open to all kids. So that's advocacy. But really, I think what we mean in the context of advocacy is within the public sphere, within public policy, within the public budget process and policymaking process. How do we share our perspective and persuade people to take us into account when they make decisions that will affect us, our parents, our students, our teachers, our staff. So it's both that simple and that hard. I think you have to be really clear about what you're looking for, whether it's a budget ask or a policy change or some other thing in the environment that we need for students and families. But then you also have to be really mindful about the environment, who you're asking, the timing, how you talk about it. All of that stuff gets more sophisticated, but really at the end of the day, it is just asking for what you want.
Yeah, I think we should do more of that in general, asking for what we want, right? That's the only way you get what you want is if you ask. That's right.
Yeah, totally.
So when we talk about specifically advocacy for charter schools, right? So again, I mean, asking for what we want can be in lots of different contexts, but when we're talking about charter schools, and specifically we're talking about charter school board members learning to be advocates, and I am hoping that lots of other charter school leaders will also be hearing us on this podcast, but we're really targeting board members. So what is advocacy for charter schools, and how do we, as board members, you and I are both board members, how do we understand and ask for things that both impact our school directly and also the whole charter movement? Because if the charter movement isn't there, our schools don't exist, right? So
Totally.
Specifically, why advocacy for charter schools, and why do we have to have our own specific voice as charter school board members?
Yeah. So just, I think putting it to context, it's helpful to think in California, public education is kind of big business. It's more than half of the state budget. We serve as a state a little bit less than 6 million kids. And charter schools are a small subset of that. So about 700,000, growing still in the number of enrollment, although not necessarily in the number of schools that are opening these days. Um, and with that, we also, while we are aligned in the state budget process with our friends in traditional public schools and traditional public school districts, we definitely want taxpayer dollars to go to public education. We want schools to be funded well. Charter schools are fundamentally disruptive to the educational establishment in
And that's why
California.
most of us love them, because they are disruptive, right? We
Yeah,
love to be disruptive. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So really, we're up against some not just powerful interests, meaning the California Teachers Association. Uh, we're also up against, CTA is powerful not just in education, but in all of California politics, right? Because they have so much money and influence and power in the electoral process in terms of like choosing who comes to Sacramento, choosing who gets to be elected to school boards. But also, we're one of the few industries where the main consumer is not organized, right? So students don't have a voice or an independent voice, right? And parents don't really have an independent voice either. Even the state PTA is basically very in lockstep with the Teachers Association agenda. The problem is that we want to do things that are outside of the box, and our friends over at CTA see us as taking money away from what could otherwise be going into traditional public schools. So we are a threat to them, and so when you're up against a big threat like that, you have to be organized and nimble, and you have to be able to tell your story. And the good news is that charter schools have a ton of stories to tell. CTA isn't the only foe. We also have and CSBA, so the Administrators Association, the School Boards Association, and they're like always coming for charters, mostly because, again, of resources.
Well, and again, it's sort of that idea where you said, we're disruptors, right? Not only are we taking resources, but we're also restructuring things in a way that isn't always comfortable for those groups. So as an example, the traditional school district where I am just hired, and this is like shocker of all shockers, somebody who didn't have an administrative credential. It's not against the law in California, but when you talk to people about the fact that that happened, they say, like, how could you possibly have, how could your traditional school board possibly have hired somebody who didn't have an administrative credential, right? And as you and I know, this person came from the charter school world and was effective in his job. So why wouldn't you want to hire just an effective person for the job? But I think it's that mindset and that disruptive mindset, sort of the traditional mindset versus the disruptive mindset of, it doesn't always have to fit in this lane to be effective. And so how can you think outside that?
Absolutely. And I just think, right now, LAUSD's chief executive, Alberto Carvalho from Florida, he does not have an administrative credential, but he's running the biggest school district in the state.
Right.
So I think being skills-based is important. But, in education, it is very much about like paper, PhDs and all that stuff.
Right.
But that doesn't, I don't know. There's really committed teachers and parents and kids who are getting a great education at charter public schools. And I think, in terms of advocacy and board members, they're worth fighting for, right? So
yes. Oh,
even
absolutely.
though we're up against something pretty big, it's worth fighting for.
Well, and I was going to say too, just sort of as a point of clarification for folks who are new to sort of the charter landscape, one of the reasons that CTA is not necessarily friendly to charter schools, or not friendly to most charter schools, is because many charter schools are not unionized. And you sort of referenced that earlier, but that's another big difference between traditional districts and charters. And that's sort of a rub, right? I mean, their interests, CTA is lobbying and is advocating to get more union members. That's their job, right? And if they do their job well, they either get all of our teachers to be union members or they shut down charter schools. And then those kids are educated by union members. And I'm not, I'm certainly not anti-union at all, but that is the push and pull that goes on, right? We're saying let's think outside the box, and they're saying there's already a structure. We think it works. You should be within our structure. And so that's, I think, where then we come in and say, how do we advocate in that? How do we advocate for charter schools in the Capitol in that way? And you mentioned some other people who were, you mentioned AXA and CSBA, and they're all part of what we call the Education Coalition. And that's sort of an insider phrase that means people who are involved in public education. And they've traditionally been structured around, traditional education. So let's talk a little bit. I'm curious about what you think on, is the Education Coalition a friend or a foe? Are they people we consider allies? Are they people we don't consider allies? Are there times where we do and times where we don't?
Yeah, this is so important for board members to have this context. I think when it comes to Prop 98 funding, which was a proposition that guaranteed a certain percentage of state revenues to be set aside for public education, passed in 1998. 1988. It's been around for a while. Definitely colors how public finance works. I think that we're all aligned in that because it protects education funding from other areas of the budget. And I certainly know that other areas of the budget, like even this last year, while they were getting cut, we were preserved. And so we all love that, right? Because we're all educating public school kids in California. I think that's pretty much where it stops. I mean, in general, we want more freedom and flexibility. We are happy to ask for accountability in exchange. We want to be able to give charter school leaders and community leaders in their communities the most flexibility that they can have in order to meet the needs of the students that are coming through their door right then, and in order to attract and retain great talent. And to keep parents interested, right? Because we're schools of choice. So we're not delivering something that people want. They're not gonna keep coming. So I think I do think the members of the Education Coalition look at charter schools and they're like, oh, you get it. You have it so easy. You don't have to do all this compliance stuff. And so, you have it so easy. And the reality is that we are often, there's large charter organizations and small organizations, but we're more and more, we have regulatory creep where we have more and more of the same responsibilities as school districts. And it starts to constrain our ability to deliver on our mission. And actually, as board members, I think telling the story of how we use our autonomy and flexibility to serve students well is one of the most important things that we can do as advocates.
Yeah.
I'll also just add, I as a board member, I have taken on a kind of, I don't know, like a signature project in terms of advocacy for the board I serve on. So we have a campus that leases a facility from a district, and basically the school district they're not very good at keeping up their end of the bargain, right? It's a very old facility. It's not on par. It doesn't have a multi-purpose room or a gymnasium. It's not on par with the other K-8 sites around the district. We're at the bottom of the barrel of, repairs,
Right.
and upgrades are not even in the mix. So, my advocacy kind of signature project with them has been to see if we can get my school included in a local bond.
Yeah.
Or because we've already done the work to get a state bond allocated, and we're looking for matching funds from the district. So on my own time, on my volunteer time, which as a board member I can do, I have more freedom and flexibility when it comes to advocacy because I'm not an employee of the organization. I can go and talk to school board members at our authorizing district and ask them, how can we work together? Like, how can we go together? How can I support the efforts, really to get the bond passed in our community? And then how do we make sure that some of that funding flows to our campus?
Yes.
So that's an example of trying to find a win-win with the district, like being aware of the timing, the opportunity. And part of that is knowing what to say, like having my elevator pitch, so that when I'm at a school board meeting and I can grab this key board member who represents our district and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this, I'm able to talk about who we are, who we serve, what we need, and how they can help and how we can help. So that elevator pitch is really important.
Yes. And I tell people in our trainings that the elevator pitch is useful in so many contexts, right? So, you're not just always on an elevator and you have that, few seconds, right? Maybe you're on a bus, maybe you're in line at the bank, right? And somebody says, what do you do? Or, somehow it comes up about your school. And as a board member, that may be an opportunity to recruit parents and students. That might be an opportunity to get some funding. I mean, you never know. You're in line at a bank. Maybe somebody's handing out money. You should be there, for that moment. And so having that couple of sentences that briefly describes your school, that, describes the location and the kids you serve. And, I always tack on when I talk about the charter school that I founded, the highest performing school in the district. Boom, right? It's not the school it's an independent charter school, but if you look at any other school, it's the highest performing school. That, is something that people want to get behind or get their kids into, or so you have a little 2 or 3 second, and, we call it an elevator pitch, but it's, it could also be your standing in line at the bank pitch, right? I think that's so important.
That piece to that tidbit that you chose to focus on, I think that matters a lot with, in terms of advocacy, having the right messenger, which is you as a school board member,
right.
And having the right message for the audience. So we're in California. It's a majority Democrat state. No matter where you personally stand on the political spectrum, you should be aware of where your representatives, like where do the school board members of the authorizer that you're working within, where do they stand? And where do your legislators stand? Are they Republicans? Are they Democrats? And even within that, there's so many Democrats now, there's a wide range. So are they open to charter schools? Are they very union and not an anti-charter? Like, where do they stand there? You should talk to everyone, right? Like, we should always be talking to everyone.
Sure.
But when I talk to a school board member about, for example, this facilities project, if I know that they're not super charter friendly, I just try to emphasize that we're public school, that we're serving all kids, that we have, and we're serving, for example, a higher percentage of students with disabilities than the district does. And that, that's debunking a myth and also just signaling that we're in it together. Like, we are serving all kids, and we should be a priority for them too.
Yes. And your school is so lucky to have you as an advocate for them, and with your skill set and talking to these board members. And when you talk about the local boards, it makes me think of a couple things that actually tie into this sort of more statewide thing we're talking about. One is to recruit people to run for your local boards, right? So, in our current elections in my community, we have 5 people running for 2 seats, and 2 of those people are charter parents. And we're like, hey, right? And that's, so that's the thing. So when you talk about, now you're going to go ask for money, or you're going to get asked to get on the bond, or you're going to even ask for your facilities to be upgraded, you want a sympathetic ear. And, those are homegrown, those sympathetic ears, right? We grow those by recruiting people from within our schools to do that. And I think it's also, the other part about local school board members is that they often grow up to be your state senators or state assembly members.
Absolutely. It's a farm team.
Right. And so then, exactly. And so then you having that relationship when they get to Sacramento at some point in time, because odds are some of them are going to get there, right? Then you have that relationship, and now you know them, you have their cell number, you pick up the phone, you call them, you say, hey, I want to bring a group of kids by to, have a photo shoot with you. And they're like, great, Laura, can't wait to see you and your kids, right? Which makes me wonder a little bit about what we can suggest to charter school board members to, we talk about engaging their legislators regularly. What are good ways for us to do that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think the best way to engage with legislators is to invite them onto your campus to see who you are. Like, that's the best thing about a charter school is when you actually see it, touch it, taste it, even the most liberal lefty labor Dems are going to love your school. I mean, they'll say that. And it really doesn't, there's no substitute for being able to show how your mission driven program, whatever it is making an impact in their community, not just as a school, but also as an employer, right? And as a community center for the people who come to your school every day. So the best things you could do is invite them onto your campus. So it could be that you have an elevator pitch that you're ready to, like, if you run into someone on Southwest Airlines or at a community event or whatever, you can invite them to their school. That should always be in your back pocket. You can also, I know that you worked in the district and I interned in a district. You can always reach out to a district office and request certificates to honor your teacher of the year or do different things like that.
They love to hand out those certificates. So, and this is when we talk about district, we're talking about the district offices of legislators, which is important because there's a capital office and a district office. So if you live in Bakersfield, right, you don't have to travel to Sacramento. You can just go right there in Bakersfield to your office. And they love these. So they get these certificates. They have some really formal ones that are like resolutions, and that's not what we're talking about. These just paper certificates. And you can say, hey, we'd like all of our students of the week to get one of these, and we'd like you to come present it, or we're going to have this award ceremony, and, we've honored kids from, and teachers and blah, blah, blah. And they'll send staff sometimes, but a lot of times the members will come. And again, it's building a relationship within your school.
Absolutely. Legislators, listen, assembly members have to run for office every 2 years. State senators run every 4 years. They're basically constantly running for office. And the fall, when your school is in session, is when they're back in the district. If it's not an election year, they tend to be back. The legislature is not in session in Sacramento, so they tend to be in their communities. That is a great time. Invite them to your Harvest Festival. Invite them to your assemblies. Do a virtual the pandemic has made legislators so much more comfortable with Zoom. So you can invite them to meet your staff online or whatever is convenient. But the important thing is that you reach out and make those connections, and also that you're coordinating with your administrators to make sure that they're not surprised, right? You want to have a really great,
for sure,
a really great experience, a really great tour and engagement that's intentional and strategic and highlights maybe parts of your program that you want to highlight. So that's the best thing, I think. Definitely for them to learn about you in real time in the first person way. Now, legislators are public servants and they want to hear from you. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And at the beginning of the podcast, we talked a lot about the kind of dynamics that charter schools are up against. Regardless, again, you are serving students and families. You're a big employer in your community. And so it's important that you reach out and introduce yourself. And then if you're talking to the Capitol staff, that you're really clear about what you're asking for. Because the people who are in the Capitol are policy focused. They're focused on the political process, the policy making process. And you need to come with them with a very concise problem solution action. What's going on? What do you want to see? How can I help? That's what legislators want to know. And so you can schedule those meetings. They're more compelling, I think, when you collaborate with a charter organization like ourselves. So we can give you the context, the up to the minute context. But I love to put constituents in the front because really Capitol Office folks are more deferential to constituents and will listen to you. And it's just nice to make that local connection. All politics are absolutely local. And so that's another way that you can ask for what you need.
That's right. And also just like cutting to the chase, right? They also love to hear from you locally because you're a voter, right? They want your vote ultimately.
Totally.
And charter school parents are usually very active, right? Either in their charter schools, in their communities, just sort of as a general population. So those people vote. So when you say, gosh, we've got, 500 kids at our school, that's 1,000 parents who are probably active voters. That's not insignificant, right? About in your community. And so I think that, like you said, making sure that you put the constituents first. And we do at CSDC a really good job. You do a really good job of getting out our alerts and telling people, here's this bill and we need to be active on this. And so let's say as a charter school board member, I answer that alert, I send in the text, and because you've got me on the list and you want me to send it in, I send it into my senator and assembly member. And then you call me and you say, hey, we're going to, this bill's going to be up for a hearing. Would you come testify at the hearing, or would you come me too at the hearing? So what would that look like for me as a charter school board member?
Well, we roll out the red carpet when we do that. I would say that the best and most common thing that any board member can do is just take a lead on scheduling one of those meetings in district or inviting someone on campus. The second level kind of thing that you can do is follow those action alerts and just keep abreast of what's going on in public education. CSDC has, we're tracking bills, we're sending out articles about what's going on in the Capitol. And then we also do those action alerts when it's right now, time to make an ask, time like a vote is about to happen that's important. And we're always trying to connect those issues to your self-interest, to the kind of school that you have, but also to the charter school movement more broadly. What it looks like, though, there are moments when we need people to come to the Capitol. And right now they're in the middle of doing construction in the state Capitol. So all of the legislators are over in a place called the Swing Space, which is on O Street. It's a beautiful, modern office building. And you might arrive in Sacramento in the early morning, park, make your way to the Swing Space. We'll check the agenda for committee hearing and see what time they start and when our bill's going to be there. And in the meantime, we might go run around the Capitol and drop in on the offices of committee members and say hello. We might meet with your specific representatives and just drop in casually, and then have you come back to a committee hearing like the Assembly Education Committee or Senate Education Committee, or one of the budget subcommittees, and have you speak. Budget subcommittees, most of the testimony is me too. So you just state your name and your organization. And then occasionally, we work with other allies to select the right person to give a longer form testimony, which we usually get 2 minutes, 2 witnesses for 2 minutes on each side. And they vote. So the interesting thing is being able to see how those folks vote in the moment, and to see how the dynamics play out. It's all beautiful thing about democracy. It's all open to the public and you can see what that looks like. And, the accountability for that right afterwards is very important. So we talk about thanks and spanks. Hey, we want to thank the people who voted with us, and we want to shame the people who did not.
Right.
And obviously we are very careful about those things because we don't want to burn any bridges. We're still maintaining our relationships over time. But they need to know. Part of our advocacy philosophy at CSDC is that we should make it really hard for people to vote against us, even if they are going to. It should not be comfortable. And so that means hearing from constituents, getting lots of emails, phone calls, letters, and holding people accountable.
Absolutely. And I in our link in the show notes, we have a little slide deck that goes into some of this as well. And you actually have a QR code where you can just find out who your legislator is by scanning the QR code. So if you don't know your legislator as a board member, or your home address might have one person and your charter school might have another person, and you need to cultivate both those relationships, right, on behalf of the school, but also on behalf of you as a voter, that this is your priority issue, and you want to make sure they know that either through our action alerts or those sorts of things. That's also why when you come up to the Capitol, and you're going to just do, again, we call it a Me Too because you really can only identify yourself and you're sort of piling on to the testimony, right? But you say, I'm Talita Heller, I'm from Dixon, and, I'm in, Senator Dodd's district, right? And you just make it like that clear. I am here and I'm listening and I'm watching you. And this is really important to me as a voter, right? And
always polite. I try not to bring up political stuff like I'm a voter in your district, but you know what I mean?
Which is where you're from. I mean, they know that. They know you're right.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it gets noticed when people come.
For sure.
So, we were talking about war stories.
Yeah. So I was going to say, tell me, right. There's
There are war stories.
madness. Yeah. So tell me a good one. Yeah.
Well, elections have consequences. Also, by the way, so this is 2024, October. And so in November, about a third of the legislature is going to be brand new because of a combination of people retiring and also term limits. So anyone can serve up to 12 years in the Senate or the Assembly. And it used to be that they would kind of do both. But most people now come in and spend their whole career in one house. A very interesting example of this is the president pro tem of the Senate right now, Mike McGuire, who represents the North Coast, kind of. He was on the Senate Education Committee back in 2018 when AB 1505, 1506, 1507, 1508 were introduced by CTA. Elections have consequences. And for the first time under Gavin Newsom, CTA felt like they had an opportunity to really roll back some of the freedom and flexibility that charter schools had. And so members of the Assembly Education Committee introduced these 4 bills. They were existential threats, right? They would have stopped not just new school growth, but actually existing schools would have had to prove that they weren't having a negative fiscal impact on the district, which is basically impossible because of the way public schools are funded. Like if one student comes to a charter school, you could argue there was a negative fiscal impact on the district. And so we mobilized. I was working for another charter organization at the time, and we really pulled out all the stops to get people from around the state to come to Sacramento to pack the hearing rooms, pack the hallways in the old building when there was no air conditioning in the hallways. It was empty.
I was in that hallway. I saw you in that hallway. Yeah. I was there. Yeah. With the shirts in the hall. Yeah.
Absolutely. We had matching t-shirts. We were, we lined people up out the door and around the corner. And like people definitely noticed. And like I learned a lot from that process, and there's some things that I would have done differently in hindsight. But at the end of the day, we were able to soften the attacks. So went from 4 bills down to 2. The focus was on preserving existing schools, and so the shift we made it harder to open new schools, which I'm not proud of. But we definitely blunted, I think, some of the impact there. And back to Mike McGuire, now he's the president pro tem of the Senate, and he remembers that. He doesn't particularly like charter schools, but he remembers how we gummed up that process, how we crowded those hallways, the parents and staff that cornered him in the hallway and asked about his vote. And now as a president pro tem of the Senate, like he is eager to avoid charter wars. He wants to keep things moving on time. And so we've seen him, while he's not a charter school advocate, we've definitely seen him make some decisions to tamp down some of the unnecessary aggression that comes from the other side by just saying like, we're not taking that up this year. This is not a priority. So that's important, and it has an impact.
Absolutely. And I often talk about in the trainings that everybody likes, and Senator McGuire maybe had a different, I don't know how he feels about his specific charter schools, but also I think that you find advocates and allies among the legislators by showing them your schooling and making them fall in love with it, right? Because everybody loves their own charter schools. It's those other charter schools they don't like, right? But when you get enough of those people together that like their own charter schools, and then you have a, President pro tem who's also wary because he's seen the power of the parents and the staff and the, community around charter schools. I think it is important. I mean, it does make a difference. People don't want to, don't want to create that friction if they don't have to. And certainly they don't want to create it for their own schools, right? Because they really love their own schools. Yeah.
Well, and on that point, like one of the things I would have done differently is had a little tighter control over the messaging. it's important to remember in the state capitol that it is skewed. Like, it is because of our political system and because the legislative districts are districted to have lots of a high concentration of Republicans or Democrats. So the candidates then go far left or far right to get elected. And the majority party is Democrats, and the majority of those folks are liberal Democrats. Although we do have a pretty good middle, like a kind of a thoughtful middle there.
Is it?
Anyways, it's important to remember that the legislators that we need to convince have liberal democratic values. And while those may not be the same as our values as charter school folks, although the charter school tent is super broad, this is one of the things I love about it.
Yeah,
There's
me too.
people on
Yeah.
all ends of the spectrum who come to charters and see that this is going to help them serve kids in their community that are not being served well. So that's really one of our strengths. But we have to always remember who we're talking to and how to connect with them on shared values rather than trying to expect that they're going to be convinced by our own values. So,
Right.
just to be really super clear, there were folks during the 1505 fights who were very anti-vaccine, which is right leading up to the pandemic. And they came out and they basically said, we support our charter school because we don't have to vaccinate our kids to go there.
Right.
And liberal Democrats within the Capitol were like, it just turned them right off. And any opportunity we had to bridge that gap kind of dissolved in that moment. And so, again, we just have to be strategic and thoughtful about who we're talking to and how we bring them over.
Absolutely. And I think, that's another great example of a reason to sort of follow your lead and the good work that you do for CSDC in sending out the alerts and understanding the messaging and understanding the bills and understanding that as a private citizen, you can go to the Capitol and talk about whatever you want. But if we're together as charter allies, right, if our goal is to kill a bad bill or promote a good bill or do any of those sorts of things on behalf of our charter schools, then we need to do that together. And we need to work together. We need to kind of not, and back to the thing you were saying, you don't say things like, I'm a voter and I'm gonna, and you don't say those things. They already know, that you're a voter, right? And you also, it's an abundance of politeness and decorum. And I believe legislators see themselves in that way. And so even I think sometimes especially when you bring kids up, to be advocates, which is also a whole nother wonderful aspect of, having students there, is understanding the decorum and that you kind of dress up a little bit to come to the Capitol and you do, those sorts of things. There's an organization, one of our member organizations that brings up a group of kids every year, and they knock it out of the park. I mean, those kids come up in matching blue blazers and they have a legislative agenda. And they get appointments with their legislators and those legislators that put that stuff on their social media feeds, right? So it's not even just like that it's working on behalf of the charter school. The legislators are like, bring it, we want this, right? And that relationship makes it hard to vote against charter school bills then. When that organization then, comes back and says to you, this is going to shut down that school you love, they're like, whoa. Hey, hang on. Let me take a look. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think legislators in politics in general, it's either you have money or you have people, but then you also have emotion, which is, and those things can carry the day.
Yeah.
And wanting to protect the kids and families in their community is a strong and valid emotion for folks. So that's
sure.
Great. Do you have any more things you want to share?
Oh, I have this one that's kind of a funny story just about how the process is never linear, right? You think, I mean, if you watch Schoolhouse Rock as a kid, right, and you think like, oh, you write a bill and you do this and you do the thing and whatever. This is a story that I like to identify as my nerd claim to fame because only a certain number of people in the entire world know about this bill. But the people who do know think that it's like really powerful. It is really powerful. It was a special education funding reform bill, right, for the state of California back in 1997. And I was a young staffer, and it ended up being the only bill I had left to staff. I was working for a woman who later went on to Congress. She was an assembly member at the time. And I worked night and day on this bill, trying to build this coalition. This bill had been introduced for 18 years, had never passed. This was like our closest chance to doing it. And the day before the last day of session, so the last chance for this bill to live, right, my boss gets a call. And it's the governor's office, and they're saying, because they'd been working with us on this a little bit, and saying AB 602 is dead. It's just dead. It's not going to go to the Senate. It's not going to get heard. It's dead. So she comes, and she's feeling bad for me because I spent so much time on this. And she's saying, you just go home tonight, have a glass of wine, relax. You've done such a good job. Nobody's been able to carry this forward. And then tomorrow when you come in on the last day of session, right, just help other staffers. We have nothing else to do at this point. This is my only bill I'm staffing. So I walk in the door the next morning, and, it's like, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. I walk in the door, and our receptionist is on the phone. And he puts his hand over the phone, and he says, AB 602 is twitching, right? And I'm like, what? It was dead. That is a doornail last night. How could it possibly be, right? And anyway, it turns out at 3:30 in the afternoon, there's a Senate Education Committee. There's some amendments introduced in the committee. The bill is heard. They stop the clock. It was a year you could stop the clock. They stopped the clock. The bill was heard at about 2 o'clock in the morning on the Senate floor. And at 4:30 a.m., my workday ended as I walked out of the Capitol. The bill had passed and landed on the governor's desk, where he had said he would sign it if it got there, right? And it's just, it can change like that, right? And none of us saw that coming. So I think that's the other reason when we talk about advocacy, is to really continue to build the relationships, apply the pressure, make sure you know what you're talking about, because you just never know. It is not over until it is over, and
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah.
I, just this year we saw the Solano County charter leaders really push into their state senator, Bill Dodd, who's retiring this year, who authored a bill that was really anti-charter and very not necessary. It was about two fairly dysfunctional. It was meant to save two fairly dysfunctional districts in his within his district, school districts within his Senate district. I think the Ed Coalition folks saw it as an opportunity because it was really driven by him. It was not them coming to the table and saying, will you carry this bill? It was him saying, I've been listening to my school districts and they need help fighting off charter schools because they're in fiscal distress. A logical leap between the mismanagement that's necessary or that was happening in both of those districts, and then the need to close off options for students and families. I don't know how they got there, but it was great last year to see how the Solano County charter leaders, who had already been meeting consistently and had relationships amongst each other, came together collectively to hold their state senator accountable.
And they had a relationship with him. They actually, so when he's presenting the bill, he says, the charters in my district are great, but, right?
Yeah.
There's an exception, right? Because in a different county, he loves the charters, right? And then in this specific county, he didn't want the charters, but they were all in his district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the way that the school leaders, we just worked together really well in terms of another charter ally met with him early and tried to encourage him not to introduce the bill. And then he did. And then the school leaders we worked with them to help them understand what the bill meant. There was a lot of detail in there. And one of our strengths at CSDC is being able to analyze policy and really understand the implications. So we shared that with the school leaders. And then they started reaching out to the district director, reaching out to the senator himself, and reaching out to the Capitol office. And they ultimately landed a series of meetings that really the sponsors or the supporters of the bill dug in. The senator dug in. We had to come and testify in opposition. We packed the hearing room. And at the end of the day, we also got over 600 people to send emails to the senators but when it was coming up to be heard on the Senate floor. Um, and we worked with allies to get a very long list of schools that were on the record in opposition of this bill, which is another thing that charter schools can do, is to go on the record in opposition in the analysis of the bill. Anyways, the bill was killed on the Senate floor, which is actually pretty rare. So that means, when a bill is introduced in the Senate, it goes to a policy committee, then a fiscal committee, then to the floor, and then it switches sides. So then it'll go back to another policy committee, fiscal committee, floor, and then it basically from there it gets reconciled and then sent to the governor. That's my very quick.
Yes,
how a bill
yeah,
becomes
bill
law.
becomes law. Right, I like it. Yeah.
A lot of bills, we're for trying to kill a bill, we want to kill it in committee. Then we try to kill it with fiscal by slapping a big price tag on it, and then we try to kill it on the floor. We're just trying to stop it the whole way. But senators often vote for each other's bills, right? As favors or for whatever reason. This bill, I don't know if it's because he was terming out. I'm not sure if it's because he didn't have that many friends. I'm not sure. Or because, well, it really is because we were amazing.
It was hard work. That's right.
We were super effective.
That's right. Yeah.
It failed to, it failed on the Senate floor in a kind of spectacular way where staff in the building noticed. It was one of the very few bills that failed. But it also indicated that the state Senate was not interested in kind of feeding into these charter wars, which I think could have been a reflection of some back channeling by Michael McGuire. Maybe.
I agree. I don't know, but I agree. Yeah, that's a great story to kind of wrap up on, I think, and that really shows the power of our collective advocacy and the reason it's so important, because that bill would have impacted charters beyond the ones that, sets precedent and does all sorts of things, right? For charters beyond the ones in Senator Dodd's district that he was trying to, manipulate the outcome of with that bill. So I think, I think that's a great story to go out on. And as we're going out here, I have a question for you because you're a board member. What words of wisdom would you offer new board members or veteran board members? Just in general about advocacy, about serving on a board. I'm just curious to know what you'd have to say to them, given your service.
Well, Callan, I'm new.
That's a line we love. But you're new, 2 years in. You're not exactly new. No.
No, I'm not new. But I would say don't forget I would say try to find casual ways to connect with your fellow board members. Visit schools. We just had someone come to our board meeting and say, we'd love for you to come and get fingerprinted and come and work a playground shift. I was like, oh, I do that. Just make sure that you're really in touch with your schools and in touch with your other board members, in addition to, of course, staying aligned with your superintendent. And then, you might also look for a signature thing that you're excited about on the board. So it's not as fun if you're just going to board meetings once a month or every 2 months. If you're kind of just receiving, I like to give back actively, which is why I'm going to try my darndest. I don't know if I'm going to make headway, but I'm going to try very hard. So for example, one of the things I did was organize a visit between our school, our charter school, and another charter school in the district that has a nicer facility than us. We brought our administration and their administration together. They gave us a tour. They told us what was possible and how they did it. So we did a little facilities exchange. And then again, the next thing I'm trying to do is get some of our parents to volunteer on the bond campaign outside of all the
right. Yeah.
So,
for sure.
Get involved. I guess that's what I'd say.
That's great advice. Thank you. And thank you for talking to me today. This is fantastic. Thanks for your service as a board member.
Of course.
This has been Boarding Paths from CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And share this podcast with your charter school board member friends. And don't worry if you didn't get it all. Everything we talked about today, we took notes for you. View today's show notes at chartercenter.org/boarding pass. Thanks as always to Greg Hall, Mike Watson, Melissa Cabral, and my colleague and today's guest, Laura Kerr. We'll see you next time on Boarding Pass.
Now that you've got your boarding pass to effective charter school governance, why not upgrade to first class? By becoming a member of the Charter Schools Development Center, you'll gain year-round access to expert guidance, cutting-edge resources, and a network of experienced charter advisors. CSDC membership is your fast track to excellence in charter school governance, offering personalized support and professional development opportunities that will help you and your school soar to new heights. Go to chartercenter.org/membership to learn more.